The case of the vanished rain falls steady over the sleepless city, a rhythm Alara Vale knows too well. In a city where the lights never stop flickering, people vanish without a sound. No headlines, no search parties, just the quiet disappearance of the forgotten, the homeless. The invisible, Alara Vale, a private investigator with too many ghosts in her past, refuses to look away. Her search begins in the alleys, where the rain washes away more than footprints. Each clue pulls her deeper into a labyrinth of power and corruption, a charity that isn't charitable. A face behind the mask of wealth, and a truth that bleeds through the city's polished surface. Haunted, but unbroken. Alara walks the thin line between justice and obsession, because in a place where the system fails the voiceless, sometimes one person's resolve is all that stands between mercy and the dark, and somewhere beneath the neon glow, another soul disappears and Alara keeps walking. Here is the content of the story. Rain had been falling for hours, turning the city into a blur of reflections and secrets. From the cracked window of her office, Alara Vale watched it run in crooked lines down the glass tiny rivers that caught the yellow glow of the streetlights below. Her office smelled of burnt coffee and damp paper. The hum of the neon sign outside bled through the walls, flickering red every few seconds, bathing her cluttered desk in a pulse that felt almost alive. It was close to midnight. The world beyond her door had long stopped caring, but Alara hadn't. Stacks of case files lay scattered across the table, victims' photos, names half erased, dates that didn't line up. On the wall behind her, a board was pinned with newspaper clippings and photographs linked by a spider's web of red string. Every thread led back to one word scrawled at the center in her restless handwriting: missing. Her eyes lingered on one photo. A man with a weathered face and a faint, uncertain smile. Darren Klein, she whispered under her breath, one of the many who had vanished without trace. No family, no home, no noise when he disappeared. Just gone. She leaned back in her chair, the springs groaning like tired bones. The desk lamp threw a hard circle of light that ended just before the darkness began. Beyond it, the room dissolved, and in that shadow, she sometimes thought she could hear the city breathing. She picked up her recorder, thumb brushing the worn button. Her voice was low, steady, practiced. Case file. The vanished. Day 103. Lead remains cold. Victims continue to fit the same profile: unhoused, uncounted, unseen. The city keeps swallowing them whole. Her finger hovered before pressing stop. There was something ritualistic about the act, like speaking into the void, daring it to answer. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. She reached for her coat, the long, dark one that had seen too many nights like this, and stepped out into the hallway. The flickering light overhead hummed a tired tune. Outside, the city greeted her with its usual indifference. The rain fell harder now, drumming on her umbrella, running in silver veins down the cracked pavement. Steam rose from the grates like the ghosts of those she couldn't save. Alara moved through the streets like a shadow that had learned to walk upright. Every corner whispered its own kind of sorrow, the clatter of bottles, a distant cough, the shuffle of someone trying to stay invisible. She found her way under the highway overpass, where the sound of rain turned hollow and the air reeked of oil and wet concrete. This was where the forgotten lived in the half-light, behind makeshift walls of tarp and cardboard. She walked carefully, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace of the place. Her eyes caught the flicker of a small fire in a metal barrel, a circle of warmth amid the cold. A few men huddled there, their faces etched with exhaustion. That's where she saw him. Silas. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, though life on the street aged people fast. His hair was tangled, his coat torn at the sleeve, but his eyes, those were sharp, watchful. Not the eyes of a man defeated, but of one who had learned to survive by reading danger before it arrived. Alara approached slowly, careful not to make it look like she was hunting. "Mind if I join the fire?" Silas looked her over, his voice dry. "Depends who's asking." Alara Vale, private investigator. That earned a soft, humorless laugh. "That's supposed to mean something down here." "Not really," she said. "But I'm looking into something that happened around this area. A few people went missing. I think you might have seen something." Silas shook his head. "People go missing all the time. Nobody comes looking." Alara didn't argue. She just nodded, pulled a small paper bag from her coat pocket, and placed it near the fire. The smell of warm food, real food, filled the air. "Left over from earlier," she said. "Figured it shouldn't go to waste." Silas hesitated, then reached in. The suspicion in his eyes didn't fade, but something else flickered beneath it. Gratitude. Maybe. Or curiosity. "You're not a cop," he said finally. "No," she replied. "Cops stopped caring about this kind of thing a long time ago." He studied her face, then looked away. "You should too. People who dig too deep around here. They disappear same as the rest." Alara took that in. "You sound like someone who knows what happens when they do." Silas said nothing, just stared into the fire. The rain beat harder on the concrete above them. "After a while," he murmured. "There's a truck, black, no plates. Comes late, always after the city sleeps. Folks go quiet when it shows up. Sometimes you hear the door slam, and then nothing." Her heart quickened, not fear. "Exactly. But the cold thrill of a lead. When was the last time you saw it?" He shrugged. 3 nights ago. Down by the warehouses near Harbor 12. I don't stick around when it comes. Nobody should." Alara nodded, pulling out her small notebook, jotting the name. "Thanks," she said quietly. Silas gave her a look that bordered on pity. "You won't stop, will you?" She zipped her coat higher against the rain. "Not until I know why they vanished." He laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "Then I'll save you a spot by the fire." When she turned to leave, Silas's voice echoed behind her. "If you're smart, lady, you'll burn those notes and forget this city ever existed." Alara didn't answer. She stepped back into the rain, her footsteps merging with the rhythm of it, steady, relentless. The drive back to her apartment was quiet. The city rolled past in shades of gray and amber. In the reflection of her windshield, the neon signs looked like broken constellations. By the time she reached her building, the rain had eased into a mist. She climbed the narrow stairs, each one creaking like a warning. Inside, the walls seemed to hum with the echo of what she'd heard. The black truck, the silence that followed. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in weeks. She spread the new notes across her desk, tracing the lines between old photos and new names. A pattern was forming, faint but undeniable. The people vanishing weren't random. They were being taken. Her eyes moved to Darren Klein's picture again. She imagined him stepping into the dark, unafraid because the world had already forgotten him. A shiver ran through her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rain against the glass fill the silence. It sounded almost like applause, or maybe warning. Either way, she was already too deep to turn back. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn crawled up the skyline, Alara was still awake. Her office glowed softly in the gray light. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded into nothing. The city was still sleeping, and she was still watching one more restless soul chasing ghosts through the rain. And somewhere, beneath that same city hum, a black truck rolled quietly through the streets. The night bled gold and shadow across the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like suspended constellations. casting fractured light over a sea of sequined gowns and black tuxedos. Music swelled smooth, expensive jazz that seemed to echo from somewhere deep inside a dream. Elara moved among them, invisible in her plain black uniform, her tray a fragile shield between her and the world she was here to infiltrate. The scent of champagne, roses, and old money filled her lungs. Every smile in that room was sharpened like a blade. Every laugh held the weight of secrets. And somewhere among them, Kalen. She'd studied his photos for weeks, the immaculate posture, the tailored suits, the smile that never reached his eyes. On screen, he was a philanthropist, a savior of orphans and oceans. But Elara had seen the ledgers, the missing funds, the overlapping shell companies, and the reports of people who had vanished after crossing paths with his so-called foundation. Kalen Vale, a name that sounded like it had been polished for headlines. Tonight, he was hosting his own celebration, a charity gala to fund the Renewal Initiative, a glittering lie built on other people's disappearances. Elara balanced her tray and slipped between clusters of guests. Her reflection in a wall of glass looked like someone else, hair tied tight. Posture bowed slightly, eyes darting like a thief's. The name tag on her chest said Mara. The catering company's uniform helped, but her nerves betrayed her. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Her earpiece crackled. "Silas here," the voice murmured, low and dry as static. "You've got eyes on him yet." "Working on it," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Elara, careful. The guest list's tighter than we thought. Some of Kalen's security are ex-military. They're not the cocktail party type." "Noted," she said, setting down her tray on a nearby table. Then she saw him. Kalen stood near the grand staircase, a perfect sculpture of charisma and calculation. Every gesture seemed rehearsed, every glance measured. His silver cufflinks caught the light as he shook hands with donors, laughing that low, practiced laugh that made people trust him. Next to him loomed Ryland, taller, broader, silent, the kind of man whose presence made space around him. His eyes moved like searchlights over the crowd, always calculating distances. A scar carved across his jaw gave his otherwise perfect face a kind of brutal honesty. Elara felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Ryland wasn't just muscle, he was the kind of man who could smell fear. She drifted closer, holding an empty flute to give herself purpose. Kalen's voice carried easily through the din. "And of course, transparency is at the heart of everything we do," he said, smiling for his audience. "Hope, above all, deserves witnesses." He lifted his glass, and the crowd murmured in admiration. Elara's fingers tightened around the tray. Witnesses. That word struck her like a dare. As Kalen turned, their eyes met. It was only a second, but long enough. His gaze lingered, cool and precise, as though he'd recognized her from somewhere. From someplace that wasn't this ballroom. A flicker of curiosity. Then something sharper suspicion. Elara looked away too late. Kalen gave the faintest nod toward Ryland. The enforcer's head turned. His expression didn't change, but his eyes tracked her as she moved toward the service corridor. Elara forced her pace to stay steady. She could feel the heat of his gaze on the back of her neck. In the corridor, the music faded to a dull throb through the walls. She slipped into the staff restroom and locked the door, her breath catching in her throat. Silas's voice crackled again. "What happened? I think he saw me." "Shit. You need to pull out." "Not yet," she said. "He doesn't know who I am. Not for sure." "Elara." She cut the mic. Her hands were trembling. For a moment, she stared at her own reflection in the mirror, the dim fluorescent light, the smear of fatigue under her eyes, the faint scar near her temple, a relic from another investigation gone wrong. She splashed cold water on her face and whispered, "You're fine. You've been in worse rooms." When she stepped back into the corridor, The hum of conversation had shifted quieter, more focused. She could feel the rhythm of the evening changing, like the air before a storm. That's when her phone buzzed. A message from Silas got a lead. Black truck. Same plate as the one from the dock. Parked near Pier 9 warehouse. Sending address. Alara's chest tightened. The black truck, the same model seen in the last disappearance. One of the missing was a journalist named Ren Coster, last seen chasing a lead about Kalen's foundation. She typed back, "On it. Keep the line open." But before she could slip away, she saw Ryland near the back entrance, speaking quietly into a comm device. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, swept the service hall again, methodical and unhurried. She ducked behind a stack of catering crates. The air smelled of detergent and melted ice. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Ryland moved past, his boots heavy on the marble, then turned down another corridor. When the sound faded, Alara exhaled and slipped out the door into the alley behind the building. The city night hit her like a slap, the hum of traffic, the smell of rain on asphalt, the distant wail of a siren cutting through the music still echoing from the ballroom. She unpinned her name tag, let it fall into a puddle, and pulled her coat tight around her. The address Silas sent was only a few miles away. The warehouse district slept beneath a bruised sky. Sodium lamps buzzed above empty streets, painting everything in amber decay. Alara parked 2 blocks from the pier, switching off her headlights before coasting to a stop. The black truck was there, just as Silas had said, parked beside a corrugated metal warehouse, its windows dark, the license plate half obscured by mud. She raised her camera, zooming in. Click. The flash didn't fire, thank God. She got one shot of the plate, another of the side panel where the logo had been hastily scraped off. Then movement. A door opened. Ryland stepped out, his broad frame silhouetted in the pale glow of a street lamp. He spoke into his phone, pacing slowly. Alara froze, barely daring to breathe. Through the zoom lens she could see his mouth move, no sound, just gestures. Then another figure emerged from the warehouse, shorter, slimmer, wearing a lab coat. The two exchanged something, a folder. Maybe before Ryland turned back toward the truck. Click. Another shot. She lowered the camera and checked the images. Ryland. The truck. The warehouse signage half torn away but still visible enough to read 2 words: Echelon Logistics. She frowned. That name had appeared before, buried in Kalen's financial reports. Listed as a subsidiary transport provider. A dead-end shell company that funneled money through multiple fronts. But seeing it here, connected to Ryland, that changed everything. Alara texted Silas the photo. Got proof. Echelon tied to Kalen. Warehouse 9 Pier District. Looks active. Seconds later, her phone buzzed. Get out. I'll dig into the filings. You've got what you need. She hesitated. Something about the scene nagged at her. The warehouse lights were dimmed, but not off. And through one of the high windows, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of white, like fabric, or a hand. Her throat went dry. She stepped closer, crouching behind a stack of shipping containers. The air smelled of oil and salt. A faint hum came from inside machinery. Maybe generators. She raised the camera again, zooming in toward the window. Then she saw its shapes moving in the dark. Too many. Rows of something, no. Someone. She swallowed hard, lowering the lens. The realization pressed on her chest like a weight. Whatever Kalen was running here, it wasn't charity, it was control. Captivity. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Silas. This time urgent. Alara. One of Kalen's people accessed our comm logs. They're tracking you. Now. She turned sharply. Headlights flared at the end of the pier. The black truck had started its engine. Alara Silas's voice burst through the earpiece. Louder now. Get the hell out of there. She sprinted toward her car, gravel crunching underfoot, the wind tearing at her coat. The truck roared behind her, tires screeching. She dove behind a dumpster as the vehicle thundered past, close enough for her to feel the heat of its engine. When it disappeared around the corner, she finally let herself breathe. Her phone buzzed once more, a final message from Silas. "You just opened something big. Kalen's not who he says he is. Be careful. Elara, they erase what they can't control." She stared at the warehouse one last time. The hum inside still echoed faintly, like a heartbeat behind steel walls. Elara raised her camera, took one last photo of the warehouse door, half open, dark as a mouth, and whispered to herself, "Let's see what you're hiding." Then she disappeared into the night. The city changed after that night. It wasn't something Elara could name, more like a taste that lingered in the air, metallic and faintly electric, as if the skyline itself were holding its breath. Every streetlight seemed to hum louder. Every reflection in every window looked back just a second too long. Kalen's eyes had followed her out of that ballroom, and now she could feel them everywhere. She spent the next morning piecing together the photos she'd taken at Pier 9. Grainy shots of Ryland beside the black truck, the warehouse sign that read Echelon Logistics, the blurred outline of what looked like cages behind frosted glass. Her wall was a mosaic of thread and paper, the kind of madness only an investigator could understand. But the more she connected, the more the picture resisted shape, as if someone were redacting her world in real time. When her phone buzzed, she jumped. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Elara." The voice said calm, measured. Kalen's voice. Her pulse stuttered. "Who is this? I believe you know. I wanted to thank you for your service at the gala. It takes courage to work among strangers." The way he said work made her skin crawl. "I'm sure you've heard." Kalen continued. "We're expanding operations. Inspections are due next week. Perhaps we'll see you again." The line went dead. She stared at the screen until it dimmed. He knew. Or at least, he wanted her to think he did. By the time she reached the warehouse that afternoon, the pier was deserted. A light drizzle blurred the harbor lights into streaks of gold. She wore the uniform of a city safety inspector, fluorescent vest. Clipboard, forged ID clipped to her belt. If Kalen was expecting her, she'd find out soon enough. Inside, the air smelled of rust and disinfectant. Her boots echoed through the vast, empty space. Stacks of crates lined the walls, medical supplies, if the labels were to be believed. She photographed everything, the faint heat signatures near the floor, the strange metal doors welded shut, the lack of dust where dust should be. Then she heard it, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. City inspection. She called out, forcing calm into her voice. Routine safety check. Ryland emerged from behind a pillar, his dark coat half-buttoned, rain glistening on his shoulders. "We weren't told about any inspection," he said. Elara held up the clipboard. "Paperwork went through this morning." He smiled, or something close to it. "Then maybe you can tell me why your authorization code belongs to a dead employee." Her throat tightened. She fought to keep her expression neutral. "Then maybe your database needs an update." Ryland stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the light. "You were at the gala. I saw you. Lots of people saw me. Not like I did." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then, to her surprise, he stepped aside, gesturing toward the exit. "You should go, Ms. Whoever you are, before this conversation becomes official." She walked out slowly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of haste. Only when she reached her car did she let her breath shudder free. Her palms were slick with sweat. That night, She knew they'd been in her apartment before she even turned on the lights. The air felt wrong, displaced, sterile. She saw it in the smallest things, the slightly misaligned picture frame, the faint smell of leather gloves, the indentation where her laptop had been moved and replaced with mathematical precision. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, but every drawer, every file, every hiding place had been touched. A silent message. "We see you." She found the bug beneath the lampshade, no larger than a dime. She crushed it with her heel, then stared at the fragments glittering on the floor. "Game on," she whispered. Silas went dark the next morning. His secure channel cut off mid-transmission. The last thing she heard, a sharp intake of breath and a scrape of metal. Then silence. She drove without thinking, the city blurring past her like a fever dream. Silas's last ping came from the industrial zone, a half-finished construction site near the river. The sky hung low, heavy with stormlight. She parked behind a mound of concrete and scanned the site through binoculars. Ryland's SUV was there. He stood near a floodlight, sleeves rolled up, speaking to two men in work jackets. One of them dragged a figure Silas bound and bloodied toward a stack of rebar. The sight hit Alara like a fist to the gut. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a cheap prepaid phone, the burner she'd given Silas for emergencies. She dialed its number. Across the site, she saw Ryland pause as the muffled ringtone buzzed from Silas's pocket. A distraction just long enough. Alara floored the gas. Her car tore through the gravel. Lights off. Engine roaring. She slammed the door open mid-roll and ran, shouting, "Police!" The word cracked through the air like a flare. Ryland spun, gun raised, but the blinding headlights from her spinning car caught him square in the eyes. Alara reached Silas, slashed the zip ties with her utility knife, and dragged him toward the passenger side. Bullets sparked against the concrete. She ducked, shoved him into the seat, and hit the accelerator. Ryland fired once more, the round shattering her rear window, but then he stopped. Watching, calculating. He didn't chase. He didn't need to. His message had been delivered. Rain hammered the windshield as Alara sped through back streets, Silas groaning beside her. "You're an idiot," he rasped. "Good to see you too. He knew about the burner. He wanted me to use it." She glanced at him. "Then why let us go?" Silas stared at the road ahead, jaw tight. "Because we're not the story anymore. We're the warning." By dawn, she'd left Silas in a safe house under a false name. Her own nerves felt frayed to the wire. There was only one person she could still trust, or hoped she could. Detective Marcus Miller. Her old partner. She found him in his usual haunt, a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions. He looked older than she remembered, heavier around the eyes, his badge half hidden under a leather jacket that had seen better days. "Alara," he said, blinking as if seeing a ghost. "Jesus, I thought you left town. I tried." She slid a folder across the table, photos, notes, copies of Kalen's financials. "You need to see this." He flipped through the pages, brow furrowing deeper with each one. "You're chasing ghosts again. Not ghosts. People. Missing ones. Kalen's behind it." He sighed, closing the folder. "You've got circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories. Kalen Vale funds half the city's shelters. The mayor calls him a friend. The mayor's wife is on his payroll. You think that's a coincidence?" Miller leaned back. "You need rest. Alara, you're seeing patterns because you want them to be there." Her hands trembled under the table. "You think I'd risk everything for a delusion? I think you've been in the dark too long." He slid the folder back toward her. "Let it go, before it swallows you. For a moment." She considered throwing the coffee in his face, anything to jolt him awake. But she just stood, gathering the papers with shaking fingers. "You always said the truth has a body count," she murmured. "Guess I finally know what that means." Outside. The morning rain had turned to mist, wrapping the city in a pale shroud. She walked until the diner's neon glow disappeared behind her, replaced by the cold reflection of skyscrapers in puddles. Kalen's empire gleamed above it, all glass, steel, and silence. Alara looked up at it and felt the quiet promise of something shifting, unseen. The trap was closing, but so was her resolve. They had made her the warning. Now she would make herself the reckoning. The rain had not stopped in days. It came in thin, nervous lines, tracing down the glass of Alara's apartment like fingerprints she couldn't wash away. Sleep was an idea she no longer believed in. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ryland's face lit by the fire of her shattered taillight. There was only one way forward now, through. The city archive sat beneath the courthouse, a cavern of forgotten paper and dead air. The clerk barely looked up when Alara slid a forged subpoena across the counter. "I'm researching corporate dissolutions," she said. "Need access to the 2010-2015 registry." The man shrugged and buzzed her through. Rows of steel drawers stretched into darkness, each labeled with names of companies long since buried. Alara moved like a ghost between them, tracing her gloved fingers over the dust until she found it. Quintus Logistics. The file was thinner than she expected, 2 sheets of legal stationery and 1 faded photograph of a shipping container yard. But the language was familiar, terminated under investigation for human trafficking, evidence sealed pending appeal. The address at the bottom made her pulse jump. Pier 9, the same location as Echelon Logistics. She took photos of every page, memorizing the sequence of subsidiary names: Quintus, then Echelon, then the Foundation. Different masks, same face. When she left the archives, the storm had deepened. Lightning trembled behind the skyline like the city's own heartbeat. She called Silas from a payphone, the receiver slick with rain. "I found it," she said. "Quintus Logistics. Same network, same people. On the other end." She could hear the faint rattle of a keyboard. "That's the parent shell." Silas replied. "They scrubbed it after the trafficking probe. Kalen must have bought the carcass and rebuilt under new paperwork." "I'm going back in tonight," Alara said. "Alara, that warehouse is burned. They'll expect." "That's why you'll give them something else to look at." A pause. Then, "All right, you get your proof. I'll light the fireworks." Midnight. The harbor lights flickered through the fog, fractured by rain and the ghost-white glow of container stacks. Alara crouched behind a forklift, her dark jacket soaked through. The security cameras above the loading doors blinked in slow rhythm red, then dark, camera loop engaged. Silas murmured through her earpiece. "You've got 6 minutes before they notice the loop lag. Copy." She sprinted across the open ground, keeping low. Her lockpick kit felt slick in her hands, metal biting against metal. The door clicked open with a whisper. Inside. The air smelled like salt and bleach. The same corridors, the same shadows. Only now, she wasn't here to observe, she was here to steal. Silas's voice crackled again. Distraction in 3, 2. Across the pier. An alarm began to wail. Floodlights swung toward the noise, painting the rain in harsh white lines. "Go," he said. Alara moved fast, weaving through the narrow halls until she reached the upstairs office. The room was glass-walled, sterile, its furniture too clean to be used. A computer terminal hummed on the desk, waiting. She inserted the USB and began the transfer. File names scrolled across the screen. Shipping logs, confidential. Personnel records, acquisition lists. Numbers matched dates. Destinations matched the names of shelters under Kalen's foundation. Every shipment was a person. Ilara's stomach twisted, but she kept her focus on the progress bar. 80%, 90, 95. Then the monitor flickered. The transfer froze. A voice, smooth and low, came from the doorway. I was wondering how long it would take you to come back. Kalen stood in the threshold, immaculate as ever, his expression composed, almost admiring. Behind him, Ryland filled the doorway. Rain dripping from his coat. His pistol gleamed under the fluorescent light. Ilara didn't turn from the computer. You should really invest in better locks. Kalen smiled. Locks keep honest people out. You, Ms. Vance, are not one of them. He stepped closer, examining the USB still pulsing in the port. You think a few files will save you. You're playing in a system I built. Ilara straightened. Systems fall. People burn them down. Ryland raised his gun. Kalen lifted a hand, stopping him. No. Let her finish. I like to see conviction before it dies. Ilara's heart hammered, but her mind stayed cold. You built an empire on bodies. Kalen, you launder lives like their currency. But you made a mistake. And what mistake is that I'm still breathing? At that moment, the fire alarm screamed to life. Red lights flashed across the room, sprinklers bursting overhead in a sudden rain of cold water. Smoke flooded in from the hall, Silas's diversion. Right on cue. Kalen cursed and stepped back. Ryland lunged, but Ilara slammed the keyboard into his arm and dove sideways, grabbing the USB as sparks spat from the soaked computer. She crashed through the glass partition, shards slicing her sleeve, and hit the metal staircase below. The world became chaos alarms. Water. Shouting. She ran. Ryland was behind her. Unstoppable. His footsteps pounded against the metal grating. Gaining ground. Ilara vaulted over a stack of crates, slid under another. The air was thick with chemical smoke. Her lungs burned. Ahead, an exit door gaped open to the rain-soaked dock. She sprinted, but Ryland caught the back of her jacket, yanking her off balance. She twisted, drove her elbow into his ribs, and broke free. He swung, the blow grazing her cheek. She ducked and kicked, sending his weapon skidding across the floor. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice half lost in the roar of the sprinklers. Ilara didn't stop. She leapt through the open door and into the night. The pier was a smear of rain and flashing lights, somewhere above. Silas had triggered the site's full evacuation alarm. Security personnel were scattering like ants. Ilara darted between them, clutching the soaked USB in her fist. Behind her, Ryland burst out of the warehouse, eyes blazing. For a moment, the two locked gazes through the storm, the hunter and the hunted, indistinguishable beneath the downpour. Then she was gone, swallowed by the maze of containers and the hiss of rain. She didn't stop driving until the harbor was miles behind her. The city lights blurred into a long, trembling ribbon through the windshield. Every nerve in her body ached. She pulled over beneath an overpass, hands shaking as she checked the USB under the glow of the dashboard. Still intact. The files were there. The names. The proof. She laughed once short, breathless, half hysteria, half relief. Silas's voice came through the comm, ragged but alive. "You out barely. Tell me you got something worth almost dying for." She stared at the tiny device glinting in her palm. "More than that," she said softly. "I've got the truth." A pause, then Silas's voice. Quiet but certain. "Then we finish this." Ilara looked out at the rain-drenched city, its towers glistening like the teeth of some enormous machine. Kalen would come for her now. She could feel it in the hum of the air, the way the shadows seemed to move on their own. But she had something he didn't, a story too big to bury. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to clarity cold. sharp and dangerous. She turned the key, engine roaring back to life. "Let's burn it down," she whispered. Morning broke like a bruise across the skyline. The storm had passed, but the city still looked wet with secrets. Steam rose from manholes. The air smelled of metal and aftershocks. Elara hadn't slept. The USB drive sat between her and Silas on the cheap Formica table of a borrowed apartment, its blinking light the only pulse in the room. Lines of code scrolled across Silas's screen spreadsheets. Ledgers, manifests layer after layer of Kalen's empire unspooling like a confession. Each shipment number matched a name. Each donation matched a disappearance. He spoke without looking up. 6 years. 2 continents. At least 200 victims confirmed. Maybe more. Elara's voice was low, and every one of them moved under the Foundation's charity licenses. Silas nodded. Medical transfers, relief logistics, overseas adoption channels. He turned compassion into camouflage. For a long while, the only sound was the soft clatter of keys and the hum of the city beyond the window. Then Silas leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You realize this data's a death sentence if we keep it. It's a death sentence if we don't," she said. They encrypted copies, sent packets to every address that mattered: journalists, human rights lawyers, a prosecutor Elara still half-trusted. Each send button felt like lighting another fuse. When it was done, she closed the laptop and exhaled. Now we wait. The waiting lasted less than a day. News moved faster than even Kalen could smother. By sunset, every major outlet carried the same headline: "Philanthropist arrested in human trafficking raid." Helicopter footage showed police swarming Kalen's downtown headquarters, glass walls flashing red and blue. Elara and Silas watched from the flickering television in a half-lit room. Kalen appeared briefly, immaculate even in handcuffs, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Ryland was dragged out separately, face bruised, eyes burning with something that looked almost like disbelief. Silas's hands trembled around his mug. "That's them," he whispered. "Those bastards." Elara studied the screen. Expression neutral. "Justice looks better on camera than it does in real life." He turned to her. "Don't do that. Don't take this away. They're done." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the clean rush of victory, the relief she'd promised herself through sleepless nights. But all she felt was the weight of absence of the people they couldn't save in time. Still. When the anchor read the final line, authorities confirmed dozens rescued from facilities connected to the Vale Foundation. Silas's face broke. The mask cracked, and tears slipped through. "For them," he said, voice shaking. "For the ones who didn't get out." Elara reached across the table, resting a hand over his. "For them," she echoed. Detective Miller came the next morning. No sirens. No warrant, just a man standing in her doorway, hat in his hands, eyes shadowed by regret. "Elara," he said quietly. "You were right. About all of it." She leaned against the frame, arms folded. "Took you long enough. I should have listened." He hesitated. "You saved lives. I exposed a monster. The system you serve let him build an empire first." Miller winced. "We can't fix what we don't see. You saw. Marcus, you just didn't want to look." The silence between them said the rest. Finally. He nodded once, accepting the verdict she'd already given, and turned to leave. "Take care of yourself," he murmured. "I always do." Weeks passed. The city moved on in the way cities do, swallowing headlines, replacing horror with fresh distractions. Kalen's name faded from billboards. Ryland's trial became just another line of scrolling text on a news ticker. Silas found a small apartment overlooking the river. The first time Alara visited, she barely recognized him clean-shaven. A plant on the windowsill, a faint smile that wasn't entirely haunted. He handed her coffee and said, "I keep expecting to hear the alarms again, but all I get is birds." "That's what peace sounds like," she said. "You ever try it?" Alara smiled. Faintly. "Doesn't suit me." He studied her. "So what now?" Now she glanced out the window, where the water shimmered like polished steel. "Now I stay ready." That night, Alara returned to her own place. The bugs were gone, the locks replaced, the shadows familiar again. Her investigation board dominated the wall, a collage of faces, maps, threads, and notes, one by one. She removed the photographs of the rescued victims. Each bore a red mark she'd drawn herself found. She pinned them into a separate folder and set it gently on the shelf. Then she turned to the remaining space on the board. The center was empty, waiting. Beside it lay a fresh file labeled in her careful handwriting, "Cold Case." She stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the city through the cracked window. Somewhere below, sirens wailed far away this time, belonging to someone else's night. Alara felt the ache in her bones ease, just slightly. She'd done what she could. Justice wasn't clean, but it was real enough to hold. She stepped out onto the rooftop. The wind smelled of rain and neon, carrying the heartbeat of traffic below. Lights stretched in every direction, each one a story, a secret, a warning. She leaned on the railing, eyes scanning the skyline where Kalen's tower once gleamed dark against the stars. The city looked different now, not safer, not kinder, just awake. She slipped her hands into her pockets and whispered, almost to herself, "On to the next, below." A billboard flickered an advertisement for some new foundation promising hope and reform. The irony made her smile. Alara turned away, the night closing around her like an old coat. Behind her, the last photo on her wall fluttered in the breeze from the open window, one corner catching the light before settling flat against the corkboard. The word "found" glowed faintly in red marker. Beside it, the empty space waited, and somewhere deep in the city, another story began to stir. The courtroom smelled of marble, dust, and fear. Even justice has a scent, Alara had learned that long ago, and today it lingered like old paper in cold light. Kalen sat at the defense table in a suit the color of ash. The charm that once filled ballrooms and press conferences was gone, replaced by something harder, colder, and truer. Across from her, Ryland kept his eyes low, wrists shackled, the thick muscles of his forearms tense but still. The room hummed with murmurs, reporters, survivors, officials pretending to be neutral. Cameras lined the back wall, blinking red like watchful eyes. Alara took her seat near the aisle, notebook in hand, though she had no intention of writing. She was here to see, to make sure the truth didn't dissolve under the fluorescent lights of procedure. The prosecution played the files from the USB drive, her files on the big screen. Names, shipment logs, financial statements. The evidence didn't shout. It whispered with the quiet horror of precision. Every number told a story. Every transaction was a life. Gasps filled the room as the faces of victims appeared, photos taken from fake medical manifests, now revealed for what they were: documents of abduction. Kalen didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on the screen, lips pressed into a pale, controlled line. But the mask cracked when they played the recording from the warehouse, her voice ordering Ryland to clean it up, meaning erase them, for the first time. Alara saw a flicker of something beneath that composure, not guilt, but calculation. Kalen was measuring the damage, estimating what could still be salvaged. When the jury foreman finally rose, the words came slow, heavy, final. On all counts guilty. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It wasn't triumph. It was the collective exhale of a city realizing how deep the rot had gone. Kaylin's transfer to the maximum security facility made national news. Elara watched it from the same diner where she'd once tailed a suspect through the window reflection. Now the screen above the counter showed Kaylin stepping out of a transport van in cuffs, flanked by guards in gray. The reporter's voice cut through the static, once hailed as a visionary humanitarian. Kaylin Vale begins a 25-year sentence without parole. Elara sipped her coffee. The bitterness felt right. Kaylin's arrogance had faded, but not her eyes. They still carried that glint, sharp and alive, even as the gates closed behind her. A predator in a new cage, learning the terrain. In her cell, Kaylin wrote letters to lawyers, to senators, to anyone who still owed her favors. Her empire might have fallen, but her will remained unbroken. She'd lost her crown, not her instinct to rule. Some nights, other inmates said they could hear her pacing, whispering to herself, plotting, justice, she'd say, almost smiling. Everyone wants a piece of it, until it cuts them too. Ryland's story ended differently, months after the trial. The world mostly forgot about him, just another name in a long sentence. But Elara kept tabs. She read about the prison riot in a local paper, how a guard was nearly killed when the power failed, how Ryland intervened, pulling the man to safety, standing between him and a blade meant for his throat. For that, his sentence was reduced. The article quoted him once. Just one line: "I did a lot of wrong. Maybe this time I can do a little right." It wasn't redemption, but it was something like it. Later, reports mentioned he'd begun mentoring younger inmates, teaching them how to keep their heads down, how to survive without becoming monsters. He even wrote a letter to the victims' families, one of whom shared a few lines with a journalist: "I can't undo what I've done, but I can face it. Every day. That's the closest thing to forgiveness I deserve." Elara read it twice. Then she folded the paper and tucked it into her coat pocket. Sometimes justice doesn't end with punishment. Sometimes it begins there. The cemetery lay on the edge of the city, where the skyline gave way to silence. It was late afternoon when Elara arrived, a small bouquet of lilies in hand, the sky bruised with approaching rain. She walked between the stones until she found the name she'd been carrying in her chest: Mara Devlin. One of the first to disappear, one of the last to be found. The marble was clean, the letters deep. Someone had already left a candle. Elara knelt, brushed the dirt from the inscription, and set her flowers beside it. She didn't pray. She never had the habit. But she spoke anyway, voice quiet, carried by the wind. "They'll remember you now," she said. Not as a file, not as a number. A crow called from a tree above, a single harsh note that echoed across the grass. Elara closed her eyes. The city's noise was far away now. Sirens, horns, the hum of a world still spinning. In this pocket of stillness, she allowed herself something she rarely did: stillness. When she stood, she touched the headstone once more and whispered the words she'd written long ago in her first case file, words that had guided every sleepless night. Every chase, every loss: justice will not serve itself. It was a promise, not to the dead, but to the living. Night came slow, the way it does when the air is heavy and the mind won't rest. Ilara returned to her rooftop, the same place she'd once stood watching Kalen's empire fall apart in blue and red lights. The wind was colder now. The city pulsed beneath her, restless as always. She lit a cigarette, watched the smoke twist upward into the dark. Somewhere below, a siren wailed another crime, another victim, another beginning. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Silas. They're rebuilding the foundation. For real this time. Safe houses. Recovery programs. Thought you'd want to know. She typed back 2 words. Keep going. Then she slid the phone away and looked east, where the first trace of dawn hinted behind the high-rises. The world would spin again. Monsters would rise again. And she'd be there, waiting. The cigarette burned low between her fingers. She crushed it against the railing, the ember dying like a heartbeat. For a moment, she let herself breathe, just breathe. Then Ilara Vale, the woman who had torn the mask from a philanthropist and stared into the machinery of human cruelty, turned from the edge and walked back into the shadows, not in triumph, not in peace, but in purpose, because justice, she knew, would never serve itself. Some stories end in courtrooms, others fade in the rain, but a few, the ones that matter, keep breathing long after the noise dies down. For Silas, life began again in small, ordinary ways. A key that actually fit the door, a bed that didn't smell of fear, light through clean curtains instead of the glow of computer screens. He found a 1-bedroom apartment above a used bookstore on Halbert Street, the kind of place where the walls leaned with age and the floor creaked like it remembered every footstep. It suited him. Quiet, patient, surrounded by stories older than his guilt. The owner, an old librarian named Mrs. Quinn, offered him a job cataloging donations and repairing bindings. "You look like a man who knows how to handle fragile things," she said. He almost laughed. She didn't know how right she was. Weeks turned into months. Silas built a life from the rubble, 1 book, 1 paycheck, 1 morning at a time. He started volunteering at a local shelter, teaching teenagers how to use open-source software safely, how not to disappear online. People started trusting him again. That was the hardest part, being believed in. But he learned to accept it. And on Sundays, he went to see his sister and her kids, the first time they opened the door. The younger one, Mia, hid behind her mother's leg. By the 3rd visit, she was drawing him pictures, shaky crayon portraits labeled Uncle Silas. He framed the first one, hung it above his desk at the bookstore. In the evenings, he still thought about the warehouse, the sirens, the faces on the screen. But those memories no longer dragged him under. They reminded him why he'd survived. Redemption, it turned out, didn't come all at once. It arrived like dawn, slow, uncertain, but unstoppable. Ilara saw him again 6 months later. It was late autumn, the park half empty, leaves turning to gold around the edges. She was sitting on a bench with a newspaper folded beside her. The Vale Foundation verdict anniversary 1 year later. Silas approached quietly, a thermos of soup in one hand, a paper bag in the other. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," he said. She gave him a sidelong glance. "Since when did you start cooking?" "Since Mrs. Quinn caught me burning toast and decided I needed supervision." She took the thermos, opened it, and breathed in the scent of something warm and honest. Tomato and basil. "Family recipe," he said, then added, "By which I mean I read it off the back of a can." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't come easy. "Still counts." They ate in silence for a while, watching a group of kids chase each other through the fallen leaves. The air carried that crisp, electric stillness before the first snow. Silas finally broke the quiet. "They wrote about you." You know, in the paper. Said the DA's office called you a key contributor to the exposure of a global trafficking ring. Sounds fancy. I prefer stubborn pain in the ass, she said. He chuckled. So what now? You staying with the Bureau? For now. They offered me a promotion, media relations, if you can believe it. She shrugged. Less fieldwork. More politics. I'm thinking about it. You deserve some peace, he said softly. Maybe, she admitted. But peace and purpose don't always live in the same neighborhood. He nodded. Understanding. They'd both made their peace with the scars his visible, hers buried deep beneath the calm. When the sun began to dip, she stood and brushed the crumbs from her coat. Keep cooking. Silas. You're getting good at it. And you? He asked, still chasing ghosts. Ilara slung her bag over her shoulder. Only the loud ones. He grinned. Then I'll keep the soup warm. She walked away through the rustle of leaves, her figure fading into the amber light. Behind her, Silas watched until she disappeared into the distance, not a savior, not a hero, just a woman who refused to look away. Recognition came quietly, like everything else in her life. An article in the Tribune described her as the relentless investigator who brought down a saint. The photo showed her half-turned, caught mid-stride, hair windblown, expression unreadable. The caption read, Ilara Vale, the woman who made justice move. Detective Miller clipped the article and pinned it to his office wall. When she stopped by one morning official debriefing, nothing more, he nodded toward it. You ever think about coming back to the force? Not my style, she said. He smirked. Didn't think so. Still, good to have you on our side. For the first time since everything ended. She met his eyes and didn't see doubt there. Only respect. The kind built through blood and consequence. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Vale coffee sometime. No case talk. She didn't answer. Just lifted a hand in a half wave and kept walking. Some bridges didn't need rebuilding. They just needed distance. That night, she passed by the bookstore, through the window. Silas was helping a young man stack paperbacks, his laughter echoing faintly over the hum of city traffic. Ilara watched for a moment the easy rhythm of ordinary life, rebuilt from ruin, then turned down the next street, her boots tapping against the wet pavement. The rain had started again, fine and steady. She pulled her collar up, smiling to herself. The city glowed beneath the streetlights, alive and breathing, neither enemy nor friend, just a pulse that never stopped. And somewhere within it, she knew, another story was waiting to begin. Ilara Vale walked on, no longer the haunted investigator chasing ghosts, but the keeper of what came after, and above the city. The clouds opened just enough for the moon to break through, pale and forgiving. The past didn't own her anymore, but the fight, the reason she'd begun all this, still did. Because justice, she knew, wasn't a destination, it was a direction. The city healed slowly, the way scar tissue forms, tough, uneven, but proof of survival. Kalen's empire was gone, but its ashes had seeded change in strange places. People began to look closer, to ask harder questions. And at the center of it all stood Ilara Vale, reluctant symbol, unexpected advocate. She hadn't meant to become a face for reform, but when the press started calling, she didn't turn away. She sat on panels, gave testimony, walked into rooms full of officials who'd once dismissed her. This isn't about heroes, she told them, her voice steady beneath the lights. It's about the people who disappear while we pretend not to see. She spoke of shelters, of missing persons, of those who fell between the cracks of mercy and law. Her words didn't shout, they cut, clean and deliberate, like glass on velvet. By the time the winter session closed, The city council had voted to fund new housing initiatives for the displaced, a direct consequence of the Kalin case. Reporters called it the Veil Provision. She didn't smile at the name. She simply nodded and kept walking. Months later, her office looked different. The investigation board that once overflowed with names and photographs now stood bare, clean cork. New string, new pins waiting for purpose. She'd taken down every reminder of the old case, packed them into a single box labeled archive. On her desk lay a fresh folder, crisp and waiting. The cover read only 2 words: Cold Case. Alara sat for a long time, tracing the edge of the file with her finger. The hum of the city filtered through the window car horns. Rain. Life continuing. Somewhere out there. She knew. Another ghost was waiting. Another truth wrapped in silence. She reached for her pen. The click echoed in the quiet like a starting gun. Later that night, she walked home through the rain. The streets glistened with reflections, puddles catching fragments of neon and shadow. The same alleys, the same hum of electric light. But everything felt sharper now, like the world itself had leaned closer to listen. A car idled at the corner, sleek and black, too polished for this part of town. A man stepped out, tailored suit, smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alara Vale," he said, voice smooth, deliberate. "Didn't think I'd ever see you outside a courtroom. Depends who's on trial." She answered. He extended a card. "Arthur Lennox, CEO, Candescent Biotech. We're partners with the city's new housing initiative. I hear you're quite the watchdog." Alara took the card, studied the embossed logo, a stylized phoenix. Biotech and housing. That's an interesting mix. Lennox smiled wider. "We believe in rebuilding lives from the inside out." Something in the phrasing made her skin tighten. Too polished. Too rehearsed. She slipped the card into her coat pocket. "I'll remember that," she said. "I'm sure you will." He turned back toward his car. "Enjoy your evening." "Miss Vale." The door closed with a soft, expensive click. Alara watched the taillights vanish into the fog, leaving only the hiss of tires and the faint smell of ozone. She exhaled slowly. The rain began again. Heavier this time. "Always another phoenix," she murmured. Chapter. The next morning, she was back at her desk. The card lay beside the new case file, a drop of dried rain darkening one corner. She opened a fresh page in her notebook, wrote the name Arthur Lennox across the top, and beneath it, a single question mark. Then she tacked the card to the board. Directly under the word "cold case," the board was no longer empty. That evening, she met Silas at the usual diner. He'd brought her another container of soup chicken this time. The good kind, he'd said. They talked about small things, the bookstore, his niece's first spelling bee, the neighborhood cats that had adopted his windowsill. When he asked if she was working on something new, she only said, "Always." He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You know, most people take vacations when they finish changing the world. I'm not most people, I know." He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To not being most people." She clinked hers against his. "I'll drink to that." Later, she stood once more on the rooftop. The city spread out beneath her, glittering like spilled mercury. The night hummed with the rhythm she knew too well: sirens, whispers, the low throb of a place forever on the edge of redemption. She lit a cigarette, the flame catching the wind before it steadied. Smoke curled upward, dissolving into the cold air. From up here, everything looked smaller: the towers, the lights, even the ghosts. But Alara knew better. Evil didn't vanish. It evolved, and she'd evolved with it. She flicked ash over the ledge, watching it drift down like snow. Tomorrow, she'd dig into Lennox, into the Phoenix logo and the funding records and the pretty lies hidden beneath charity. The city would never stop feeding on itself, but neither would she stop cutting it open to see what it was made of. As she turned to leave, the wind carried the faint echo of laughter from somewhere below, real, human, alive. It made her pause, just for a moment, and smile. Then she pulled up her collar, stepped into the darkness, and disappeared into the pulse of the streets. Her shadow merged with the city's two shapes in the same endless motion, because justice wasn't a moment, or a verdict, or a promise. It was a calling, and Alara Vale, the lone sentinel of truth. The voice in the rain. The last light in the alley answered it once more. Some stories end with a gunshot, some with a confession. But in this city, endings are never that clean. Alara Vale. She solved the case that everyone said couldn't be solved. She tore down an empire built on money, mercy, and masks. And when it was done, when the villains were caged and the lights went dark, she didn't walk away. Because she knew something the rest of us keep trying to forget, that evil doesn't vanish. It adapts. That every time justice takes a breath, corruption waits to steal the air back. She found her purpose not in peace, but in persistence, in the faces she'd saved, in the friends she'd made, and in the knowledge that sometimes the fight itself is what keeps you alive. So she stayed. Among the rain-slick alleys and half-lit streets, among the stories that never make the morning news, watching, listening, moving like a shadow with a heartbeat. They call her the city's conscience. But that's not quite right. A conscience can sleep. Alara Vale doesn't. And maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not the courtroom victories. Not the headlines, not the handcuffs, but one person, standing alone in the dark, refusing to stop looking. Tonight, she's out there again, somewhere beneath the flickering neon, where the light never quite reaches the ground, following new whispers, new lies, new monsters who think no one's watching. But someone always is. And as long as she walks these streets, as long as the city keeps breathing, there's still a chance for truth to find its way home. And maybe that's the part that matters most. That no matter how dark the world gets, someone like her, like Alara, keeps the flame alive. Quiet, relentless, human. If you've followed her story this far, thank you. You've walked beside her through the shadows, felt the weight of truth. And maybe, just maybe, caught a glimpse of the light she's chasing. But the story isn't over. Because cities like this don't sleep. And neither do the people who guard them. So keep listening. Keep watching. Because out there, in the next alley, behind the next door, another secret is waiting to be told. And when it is, you'll want to be here to hear it. If Alara's journey moved you, if her fight for justice reminded you that the world still needs its watchers, share this story. Tell a friend. Follow the next chapter. Because every listener, every voice, every echo helps keep the light alive. This is the Disappearance Files. I'm your narrator. And somewhere out there, Alara Vale is still walking. Justice will not serve itself.